that they could extend across the street from all the investment. Ironically, you have one part of Elysian Valley where those come directly in contact, which would be the most appropriate place to do the kind of thing he's talking about. Is that even something that could happen? So just conditions would cover the residential strip on the other side of the industrial strip.
So just by show of hands, how many would be interested in exploring that question of how could queue conditions help formalize some of the informal housing and make that more viable? Show of hands. How many think that's a terrible idea?
I don't know if it's the right mechanism, but I think it's a great idea to explore it.
Yes, please.
I mean, just like I said in the past meeting, the people in this district are making $34,000 roughly a year annually. And if rent's $2,000 for 12 months, that's going to be $24,000. They're left with $10,000 for the whole year. I mean, what about groceries? What about bills? What about electricity? What about, they can't, there's no way they'll be able to start their own business. And that's bad. I mean, there's no way they can.
It also should be noted that sorry, Mark, the census in our area indicates that in 1990, the adjusted income was higher than it is now. So we also have to consider that part of the reason that's happened to communities is a reduction in jobs. So there's this thing, and that's a national trend, but our community net income has gone down in the last 15 years rather than up. And that's partially because there are less people able to walk to work and there are less middle class jobs. So this whole thing it's all mixed together, and part of it is about also empowering people to have opportunities educationally and in terms of all kinds of things, not just constraining.
And so one more comment, then I want to get back.
In Los Feliz, in '96, the house was worth $189,000. Now it's condemned up. I mean, this is going to happen here. I mean, I don't know if I want to see that here. And I don't know if the community wants that to see that here. I mean, I don't see that here. I see developers.
What mechanisms do they use? Dangerous territory, I want to say this, but across the river. What mechanisms were used when they did in Lincoln Heights some really large-scale affordable housing developments?
Basically, tax credits, state bond money. So it's federal money and state money, essentially.
So that was leveraging a particular community to subsidize. You got to exactly what I was saying. Affordable housing developers come in not out of charity, so to speak, but because the conditions for the subsidies are made so that it can happen.
Right. These lower the barriers to entry or raise the barriers to entry. They either decrease the cost and time it takes to build a project, or they increase the cost and time to build a project. The subsidies either fill the gap or don't. And so the best you can do with zoning is to kind of open the door. But the only way you can get somebody to come in is if you put some dinner on the table. And that's kind of how it works in affordable housing.
And the projects that are across the river, like in the Court Fair and Salazar project, there are no queue conditions there. There's less restriction around residential development on those lots than there is here today, and certainly less than I think would be reflected in a lot of the comments that I've heard about residential. So you would probably almost never see that type of project on this side of the river. To say nothing of the fact that you don't have lots that big and you have to consolidate.
And just real quick follow, does the same hold true with senior housing? Is it the same?
I mean, it's a different category of funding, but very much the same process.
Okay.
Okay, so
I have
let's.
a question.
Yes.
Are you talking about those across that are only 3 stories high? And the ones over here on Ripple, those are 4 stories high?
The large affordable housing development down.
Did you mean Avenue 26? Over by the gold mine. Okay, so again, just by a show of hands, as far as the outcome of encouraging housing in general, who thinks that's a good idea to encourage housing in Toronto? Okay, who thinks it's a bad idea to encourage housing in Toronto? Okay, how about if I change that and say encourage affordable housing in Toronto, meaning new affordable housing?
What about low?
in all likelihood, it means, 50-unit buildings. Okay, hey, one conversation. All right, I'm gonna have to separate you guys, and I will. Adaptive reuse. Who thinks that's a great idea to encourage adaptive reuse? Who thinks it's a terrible idea?
Well, let's take a look at that. The height of the buildings will remain at 45 feet high. That's more than what we have right now. We want to build 4 stories along the Yellow River. I mean, 4.5 stories.
I have a question.
Sure, and let me just clarify if I may, that I'm really talking about from here up. I'm just getting to the intent.
We have to look at the small print also.
Well, it's problem is that, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Mr.
One point.
Actually, let me just be respectful, let her go.
Thank you very much. What is Craig's last name, I'm sorry?
Whatever.
Weber, okay. Mr. Weber said that as it stands now, we cannot build the way they're building across the river. Correct? So why would we want to change anything then? Just leave it as it is. We can't, you know what I'm saying? It just seems, if we're there now,
Okay, so
I say
you
no
like,
change.
you like no change, okay,
I
go ahead.
like no change.
He was referring to scale, the amount of room that's available.
Well, exactly, he referred to scale, there's no space now. Who's to say they're not gonna buy out my block, which is in the purple area, and make room for that? I'm gonna be
Right.
pushed out.
Conversation.
I'll be pushed out, I'll tell you why. I know of people in Echo Park that were pushed out, and the Legion, they were pushed out. Why? They refused to sell. There was 2 houses left. They refused to sell. Well, guess what? They were forced to sell. They were forced out of there. No matter what, they had no choice.
But is it evident domain, so you took the property?
Yes, but also in Legion Park, it also happened. So, that's my fear. Why change it if it, I don't know.
So right now, you can build up to 45 feet. That's right now. Now, we were told at the neighborhood council that it was difficult to change the height limit, more difficult to change the height limit, easier to change the FAR, and that's why we went with FAR.
It's 6 of one.
Okay, well, I would imagine if we had known that, we would have attempted to lower the height as well in our recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
But still, if you change the queue condition, there's still, that won't prevent for the developers to come and gentrify this area. Doesn't matter if it's super high or super low, it's gonna, I mean, where you gonna accommodate the more than 3,000 people that's gonna be living here, plus the tourists that are gonna be around all this area?
The point of us attempting to change the queue conditions wasn't to solve all of the problems. This was a limited scope and a way of just tapping the brakes on development, that's all. So the queue condition is extremely limited in what it can do, and it's not going to answer everybody's questions. But the essence of what we were trying to do is just reduce the density, the speed at which all of these properties are going to trade, and the height and the density, as I said before, to limit that to keep the scale that we have.
I thought they say we won't be able to stop it even if we change the queue conditions.
Even
That's what they
if you
say.
don't change the conditions, you can't stop it.
Exactly, so why?
So we're here because there is an opportunity to change a certain set of rules about what you can build, how big, and what type of use is in a building. And that's the discussion today. There are so many things else you can do, what David mentioned, what Steve mentioned in terms of exploring other services and programs that you can do outside of having the government and the city agencies change the zoning. The discussion here is there is a system that we could shape. It's not a perfect system, but if we don't shape it, then what happens is the no change in the first scenario, which is it's not really specific of what kind of use. The height is at 45, and that's by right. The FAR is at 1.5, which is by right. And what we're talking about is, are there ways that we want to shape the height, the size, the type of use you want to see? And that's the purpose of this discussion. In terms of everything else in the community, we can shape it in future community plan updates. There are still other opportunities where you can organize, you can fundraise, you can come up with other solutions, like land bank was mentioned. But for the scope of this, it's so complicated, and our goal is to say, here is what you can change. Do you want to change it? If not, then what exists is scenario number 1.
My question is still the same. What is the benefit for the low-income families?
Let me just clarify, if I may. just to make it down and dirty. I think, again, what Craig said, I don't know if you intended to say this or not, but what I heard you say is that developers can apply for one-off approvals no matter what. And again, it happens here, it happens in San Francisco, it happens in New York City, it happens in Vancouver, it happens everywhere. And when nothing's allowed, or when what is allowed doesn't conform to the market, every project makes its own rules. And so that's basically what we have in West LA. That's what we've had for many years in downtown LA, where you sort of wait for the pressure to build up, and then every project makes its own rules. And so to me, and again, this is my opinion, the challenge of writing rules like this is if you make them too hard, then people will ignore them, and the developers will go straight to the city council and do their own thing. If you create a channel, kind of like, you dig a ditch for water, and it's well enough dug that the water's going to flow naturally through there, you can still have a flood that's going to go everywhere, but more things will sort of flow that way. And so I don't think we have the power to shape what we want. I think we have the power to make certain things easier and certain things harder. And what you guys are describing is making it harder to build something that's out of the envelope, which will preserve these buildings for a little bit longer. And if we make it easier to reuse these buildings, then those two things together can work to actually create some new uses here. On the housing side, if we make it easier to get projects approved, it's easier for a tax credit developer, an affordable housing developer, to go to the state and say, you should give me money to build this affordable housing because I don't have to go back to the city. There's no risk. The state's money is not at risk, and I can build that affordable housing. Or you can make it harder. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I heard it once tonight, and at the other meetings I've heard it